Hi, everyone. This is Laura McDermott for the Cornell Cooperative Extension Eastern New York Commercial Horticulture Program. Today, we're going to talk about the best management practices for UPIC farms during this COVID-19 pandemic. And we'll get started here. So first of all, I just want to be clear that the best management practices that have been drawn up by a great team at Cornell, Dr. Anu Rangarajan, Dr. Marvin Pritz, Dr. Betsy Bin, Esther Kibbe, and myself, along with Julie Suarez, who is the Cornell University Ag and Life Science College. She's our governmental liaison, and she was really instrumental in kind of jump-starting this process. So I just want to be clear that these best management practices are not the official New York State Department of Ag and Market guidance. At this point, we do not have the official guidance. We are kind of expecting that they may fold UPICs into the farmers market and market stand kind of guidance. So for those of you that haven't seen them, we can direct you to them later. But we don't know for sure if there'll be distinct guidance for UPICs or if it'll be folded in. But basically, the important thing to remember is that this BMP is not the official legal guidance. The BMPs are meant to help farmers consider options to UPIC as well as safe operation strategies. And again, they were drawn up by a team that has a lot of personal experience with UPIC. Pretty much everybody on the call has been involved with running a UPIC or working for a UPIC, or been involved with drawing up these BMPs. So it's really, it was a good team. And then the most important thing to remember is that this season is going to be vastly different than any previous season. I think once farmers get over the hurdle of implementing these BMPs, at least some of them, they are going to have a very successful and hopefully economically successful season. We just want to make sure they're safe. So making sure that people understand that there are alternatives to UPIC and they should seriously consider them. Farmers can provide custom picking for farm pickup. That would be a really good option if you don't want to have hordes of customers at your farm. You could figure out how to increase the direct sales of picked fruit directly through your farm stands. And many people have been very successful at developing online sales. And for ideas about getting started with that, there's a great link at the Cornell Small Farms website. And further down that, there's a publication put out by the Young Farmers Coalition that compares online distribution platforms, strategies and platforms. So please look at that when you visit that link. And then lastly, consider joining a multi-farm CSA or food hub. Those groups might be able to help provide labor as well as distribution options. The big thing is that communication is going to be extremely important. It's going to be important to communicate before the season and during the season very strongly with your customers. And you also are going to have to communicate with your employees. So making sure to inform and train those employees on new COVID-19 procedures and policies. You may have to hire more employees. Maybe when you're kind of separating weighing of produce from the payment of the produce, or check-in from check-out, and helping with customer management. And then informing customers of COVID-19 farm practices, eliminating entertainment and reducing congregating, providing hand washing and hand sanitizing stations, posting signs to emphasize physical distancing, and redesigning customer flow. All of those things are going to be part of what we're going to need to do. And you as a farmer are going to have to stay up to date on those current COVID-19 recommendations because they could be changing as things ease and then get restricted again, depending upon how infection rates go. You're going to really have to stay on top of that in case anything does impact how you do business. But first of all, communicating these policies to customers are going to be super important. And one of the primary things is just making sure customers know that they should not come to the farm if they're ill or if they have symptoms that make them seem ill. So allergy sufferers are going to be really, it's going to be tough because it's hard for people, other customers, your employees, to be able to differentiate between an allergy symptom and somebody who's ill, sneezing, coughing, runny nose, that kind of thing. It's going to make people uncomfortable. So trying to get people to understand that maybe the U-Pick farm is not the best place for them to be. So you want to post signs to remind customers of these changes and why staying home and why having 6 feet between people are so important. That physical distancing will be important to do at the customer flow, the enter and exit of the field. You might want to develop maximum capacity guidelines. You should communicate with families ahead of time that their family group will need to stay together this season. Children have to stay close, and there's really no opportunity for congregating, picnicking, etc. One thing you might want to think about is providing brand new containers for customers to just pick up, go out and pick. You know the weight of the container, so it might help if you're doing a volume or a weight calculation, but it might help streamline things. And somehow that cost of that container could be rolled in. I think this is going to be hard for a lot of U-Picks to do, but hopefully that will work. Providing hand washing stations, very critical. Yes?
Laura, this is Mary Choate from UNH Extension. And I had a question. You asked if anyone had questions about the containers.
Yeah.
And what we were just having a meeting about that, about all these policies. And great job on this, by the way. But around containers, in New Hampshire, the question came up, I mean, containers, bringing your own containers is intended to help make the interaction between customer and staff quicker, right? You have the same size container, you know, this one contains a pint, this one contains a quart. But you're not, are you suggesting that this would preclude the need to weigh it, or does your Department of Ag still require weighing the amount in the container?
No, the Department of Agriculture does not have any requirement about weighing now, or I do not expect that they're going to have a requirement added this year for that. Their guidelines, we anticipate, although we don't have it yet, their guidance, I don't think will be that specific. It will allow a fair amount of flexibility to the farm, but our concern is if people bring containers, and a lot of places will pre-weigh and then post-weigh in the customer's container, and that involves a whole nother level of transaction. You know, you're at the scale, everybody's touching that one container or putting a tag on it, or however you do it. So in order to avoid that, we are hoping that growers might consider just providing brand new containers for every single picker. And then they still may have to, if they do decide to do it by weight, then there might have to be a exit through the scale thing, or they might just charge for a quantity. And that would be up to the grower. But anything they can do to reduce the amount of handling, period, and then also reduce the amount of handling of containers that are coming from a place that the grower has no control over. Is that clarify that?
Yeah, it does. I also want to comment that, like in New Hampshire, they've banned reusable bags, which I think is sort of overkill, but it seems like this, because you don't have to disinfect your packaging when you get home from the store, right? That's not necessary to prevent the spread of the disease. So not having people use their own containers, I understand the argument that it will make the amount of time needed to interact with closely with another person, that will limit that. But the argument that they should bring their own container, they can't bring their own containers because we don't know where they've been, is more an argument for like just gross stuff on the containers. Like it could have, COVID-19 probably isn't spread that way, but E. coli, hepatitis
Correct.
A, other stuff. So I think I think it's important to mention that there are other things people might want to, they didn't go away. Hepatitis A didn't die. E. coli is still out there. So even if it's not for COVID-19, because people get confused, it's not a foodborne illness that we know of with all these people that have to deal with it across the world.
Yeah, that's a great point. Elizabeth Hodgson also confirmed that. And Betsy Bin was critical in putting these guidelines together. So Betsy is the director of the Produce Safety Alliance. And so that was her primary goal, is trying to put these good practices, these good food safety practices within the document, and helping growers make some of these changes that may have been difficult to put in place before, but now we have a really great teaching opportunity to help remind people that foodborne illness is out there. COVID-19 is not a foodborne illness, but this strategy hopefully would help reduce that interaction and also reduce the possibility of other other organisms making their way in, and then having it be blamed on, the farm. And I think your customers are going to be probably a little bit more acutely aware of things now. So we just want to help you implement the best practices here. So the other thing, and in New York, we did have a plastic bag ban, but they've actually removed that temporarily because, and most stores are using plastic bags because there was a concern that reusable bags coming from people's homes was a possible source of contamination. I don't think there's any evidence that that actually is the case, but there was a statewide kind of effort to remove that plastic bag ban that went into place almost 2 weeks before the pause hit New York State. And then just reminding customers to wear cloth face coverings. They will be interacting with your staff, so it's a really good thing to have them, especially when they're with your staff at the checkout, to have that face covering on. Hopefully we're going to have plenty of distance in the field, but it's a good thing to have customers wear the face cloth, and we have more links and information about how to use that. And then no pets. And then this last one, confirming that the customers understand the policy. And this could be a verbal confirmation, like you have a sign, you say, did you read the sign? They nod. That might be enough. Maybe it's an actual sign-off sheet. There's a lot of different options here, but it probably would behoove everyone to try to get that confirmation. So physical distancing while picking, this is another critical part of the best management practices. And obviously we need to have pickers stay 6 feet apart during the picking. And that's going to be a challenge. Trying to institute a one-way traffic flow both with entrance and exits, numbering the rows so that people can keep track of that, and having it clearly and very obviously labeled so that people aren't confused, making sure to have lots and lots of help out there to guide people. Again, making sure that customers know that they need to stay together. You could use flagging or some other kind of way to monitor progression of picking and where people got to so that you can move them along. Anything that you do like this, though, where the customers are going to touch it, you're going to have to remember to sanitize that on a daily basis. So make sure that it fits with your abilities to do that. Avoid moving people. Try not to get them on and off the wagon, because every time that they touch the handlebars or all of that will have to be sanitized. And then try to help people understand that once they're in the field, they need to do their picking and then leave the field, not wandering around, not going back and forth to the bathroom, just kind of gentle reminders to the customers that this, this is a different situation than we've seen in the past. So that's the gist for trying to keep people physically distanced. And we'll have some diagrams here. And the challenge with doing all of this is that everything is different, right? Every trellis is different, every crop is different, every farm is different. So the logistics part is really where the thought is going to have to come into. But this just gives you an idea of if you had a parking lot and if you were able to move people in one direction down the row in a logical manner with people stationed here trying to give them instructions and they're picking containers and then have them check out and depart. That's a great way to manage that. You could alternate the rows so that you make sure in certain crops that it's like strawberries or low vegetables without trellises, without actual barriers. You just want to make sure that they're picking both sides of the row as best they can. And then the next group, you would bring them through here after these folks have moved, just trying to get everything picked, alternating rows, etc. Another kind of flow chart here is maintaining this one-way flow where we've got a parking lot. You're going to have people moving in. They could move from either end of the field and then try to maintain an exit in the center. That might work. Checking out and departing. But again, the flow is basically in one direction. But you can already, I'm sure, see the challenges and the complications of this. I am very hopeful that our customers are going to be so well trained by the grocery stores, or at least they're accustomed to this, that they'll be able to do it without too much problems. And then this is just for trees and trellised vegetables or trellised fruits, bushes. It's then you might be able to go every single row if you've got a barrier and you can make sure that people aren't cutting back and forth across the row. But that's just the basic gist of it. Making sure that everybody is picking cleanly is going to be a challenge when you're trying to alternate rows. So just keep that in mind. So then there's some very detailed information in the thing, and I don't want to take this up. We only have a few slides left, but basically understanding weighing produce and handling the payments, that's where you're going to have customers kind of bunch up. You're going to have a lot of interaction, close interaction possibilities between the employees and the customers. But making sure to reduce the need to handle cash could be helpful, preparing to accept credit cards or any of the other electronic payments, encouraging personal checks if you want to handle that. Consider setting a unit price for volumes of produce if you provide those new containers, and that would remove the need to actually weigh things. It just may not work for different operations, but it is something to consider because it would really make things a lot faster through that checkout. And then during the season, again, considering making sure to have those flags or markers and figure out how you're going to use that. Have family members check out while others check in and out. Employees have to maintain that 6-foot distance and use a face cloth. You might want to consider installing clear plastic shields or dividers between the cashier and the customer. And then just making sure to separate employees that are weighing produce and another that's processing payments. I think it would make it faster, and it's going to decrease the interaction for some of the farms that get pretty high volume. You really are going to have to think about washing and sanitizing the employee's hands. So the hands of the employee after each interaction or between transactions, bottle of sanitizer, an ability to, after 10, 15, 20 minutes, 30 minutes, have them run and wash their hands. Again, the different exit and entrance, and having a hand sanitizer at the exit, we think would make your customers feel better about the whole procedure. There's in this document, there is a ton of information about providing a clean environment, about proper cleaning and sanitizing, links to a lot of information if you are not familiar with this. Most of this is part of the FSMA training that we do and the GAPS training that is done, but it's going to be really important to continue that, but with the appropriate sanitizers, because we are doing this, remember, not just for COVID-19, but for all foodborne illness. You just want to make sure to keep that everything as clean as possible. And that is all spelled out in the document. And I think this actually is going to be something that most farms have already doing quite a lot of. So I'm hopeful that this isn't going to be the big lift. But the most important thing, I think, really, is to make sure that you are doing everything you can to protect your employees and your family members that help you during the UPIC season. You want to make sure that they understand that they have to do that hand washing when they arrive at work, before and after eating, after using the restroom. They're already doing that, but it's really important to emphasize it. And make sure to provide training on how to properly wash hands. And then emphasize that hand sanitation is critical between the customers. It is your obligation to provide your employees with PPE, at least in New York State it is. Face coverings must be used by the employees if they are interacting with customers. So those people that are, right at the cash register, they have to use a face covering, and the farm has to provide that for them. And then along with providing it, you have to provide them instructions on how to properly use it, which is really difficult. If you guys haven't looked at those and tried to do it yourself, it's really hard not to touch the face mask, but you have to make sure to store it. If it's a non-disposable one, washing it appropriately, et cetera, et cetera. And then in the document, there's more information about using disposable gloves, the proper use. We had a lot of discussions about disposable gloves. People tend to feel too comfortable with disposable gloves, and they think it's like they're completely impervious, and they don't follow proper protocol when they have the glove on, and it becomes a bigger problem than if they didn't have them at all. So making sure if you are going to use gloves, that they understand what that protocol is. And then encourage employees to wear clean clothes each day and to wash their farm clothes separately from other clothes. And that is not really a COVID-19 caution. It is just a good agricultural practice and food safety recommendation. And so this is the last, then we can have some discussion, hopefully. These proactive steps hopefully is going to protect you guys and your customers and be a really good positive experience for everybody. And I can see that there's a lot of different questions. Okay, so I'm seeing here that Tom Kappas is wondering about getting hand sanitizing material. So you're talking about the actual hand sanitizer. That is a very difficult thing, especially in some areas. There are some local distilleries that are producing some. I hate to admit that I spent $70 a gallon for isopropyl alcohol in order to get some for my husband, who couldn't get it as a veterinarian. That was a couple weeks ago. So there are things available. They may be very expensive, but I think if you keep looking, and we can try to get, there are, in the document itself, there are some lists of things, and maybe you could find Google suppliers. And that's why we're talking about this ahead of time, because it could take you several weeks to get that equipment. Sue asks, what health risks are there if people are eating what they're picking? There's no information that lets us think that there's any foodborne problem here. I mean, theoretically, I guess, if somebody sneezed, and so if somebody in the field had COVID-19 and sneezed on a berry that somebody right behind them ate, I mean, or touched, I think it's the touching and then touching your face, your eyes, you could possibly get it, but that seems like a real long shot. And that's the whole point of physical distancing. Does anybody else who might be on the call have any thoughts about that?
In terms of eating in the field, it's really a basic food safety rule. Like if you were GAP certified, your pickers wouldn't be allowed to eat in the field. So I don't think it's, as you're saying, Laura, I don't think it's especially a COVID concern, in terms of the coronavirus, but I think it's for general cleanliness. You think particularly for certain products like strawberries or apples, if people are eating things and then, leaving the hull from the strawberry or the core of the apple or, pits from cherries or whatever, if they're eating a lot in the field, there's sort of an ick factor in that of like, oh, someone ate that and threw it down. But I don't see it as a particular risk. And I know that that's something that most UPIC customers expect to be able to eat in the field. So that may be a hard lift. And I think you mentioned it, Laura, but I really wanted to emphasize that there may be real value in encouraging or creating a schedule for customers to come to the field in scheduled time slots, especially if you know your normal customer base pretty well and are communicating with them pretty regularly, that will help you manage if there's crowds or how many people are showing up at a time.
Yeah, I agree. And I didn't spend that much time on that appointment picking. And I think a lot of folks are doing some degree of that already, especially in areas where they have big crowds. But that could be accomplished through social media or something like that, trying to control the numbers of crowds. And then again, it just always goes back to communication. And the comments in the chat box about the masking, that's another reason why trying to convince customers that they really need to keep their masks on might help us manage eating in the field. Should cash be sanitized before going into the register? We talked a little bit about that, and I don't think there's any reason that it should be sanitized. The chances that it actually is carrying COVID in particular is actually fairly small. I mean, cash is always pretty nasty, so I don't know if we didn't make a recommendation to sanitize cash. Just be really careful when you're handling it. And I do know that Tom is pointing out the sanitizers. We will try to provide more information about that. I'm just kind of scrolling down through this. Erica's asking about distributing masks for us to give employees. I do not believe that New York State is providing employers masks. I think that is the responsibility of the employer to provide the employees masks. And that's a big lift actually, because it's hard to get them. There's a lot of places giving things out. I do know some local companies that are making masks for very low money. And that might be something to help. Linda's wondering about the porta potties. So the thing about porta potties is that they should not be in the orchards necessarily, but they should be located close enough to the orchards on the exterior of the block that people can get to them. Elizabeth Hodgson, do you remember if there's any specific guidelines about how far a porta potty has to be from the crop itself?
I'm not sure that there are any specific rules about how far away it needs to be, but there should be a plan in place for what to do if it were to tip over. So, I mean, ideally, it wouldn't be too close to the crop. Additionally, if there's a hand washing station, you'd want to limit any gray water from, spilling out and touching the crop.
Right. Yeah, that's Great.
Yeah, I think there's a bigger issue. I was going to say, in terms of, I don't think we can not have porta potties.
Yeah, you have to have porta
That's-
potties. What, can you not have porta potties? I think most UPICs have porta potties now. I don't know if there's very many that are not using a porta potty, or at least have some access to some type of bathroom. And the really important thing is that you have to have hand washing. So if the porta potty is back at the farm and you're allowing customers to use these same, or you're encouraging basically customers to use the same bathroom facilities as your employees, then you're really going to have to be super careful about that. I mean, you're going to have to clean that porta potty regularly anyway, but I don't know if we have a requirement to have a porta potty. We are definitely recommending hand washing, and it's certainly recommended to have a porta potty available.
Yeah, the risk is, I think, if you don't have one, that your customers may end up using wherever they can find if they find themselves in an emergency situation, and you don't want that in your field.
Right. So Sandra has a good comment about Google applications, so you can set up appointments. That's great. And Rose Hill, yes, making the process cashless, using one of those Venmo or credit cards or all of that. Just remember that you are going to have to sanitize that credit card reader or whatever reader you're using periodically. Usually, actually, between every transaction, just a little wipe down, I think would help to do that. And Lawrence Farms has a great comment. So if grocery stores are not required to have 2 people checking and weighing produce, why is this required of UPIC? This is not required. This is recommended. So these are ways that we thought through this whole process to try to reduce the exposure between your employees and the customers. This is a recommendation. It's a way to get to accomplish something, but it is not a requirement. This entire best management practices is not a requirement. It is a recommendation and tries to help people think through best management practices. Linda's wondering about the use of tractor pulled wagons. Again, it's not forbidden. It's not that you cannot use it. It's that when you put a so let's think through that. If you have a tractor pulled wagon and then everybody that gets on it has to stay 6 feet apart, except if they're in family groups, all of a sudden you've made your challenge of physical distancing much, much more difficult. So if you're only going to use your tractor for each family group, and then you're going to sanitize it in between each use, then that might be still doable. But that's the kind of thinking that we want you to make sure to do before you put things that you've always had and that people have always loved into place. Does anybody have any other questions? You can really just unmute yourself. Again, let me see if I can put that URL into the into here so that you folks can download the document. It's much more complete than this presentation was. But we're very, very encouraged by how Ag and Markets, they accepted this, really endorsed it. Their guidance, I think, is going to be much more general, but the real important things to think about is keeping your employees safe. So physical distancing, keeping the ability for everyone to be able to wash their hands, and that the mask wearing is going to be really important for managing the transmission of COVID-19 on your farm during your UPIC season.
Laura, this is Nada Haddad from UNH Extension. I have a question about service dogs.
I think that service dogs are, are still going to be allowable. Yeah, I don't see any reason why they wouldn't be allowed still if they're actual service dogs. And there's a big problem between what a service dog is and what's the other one?
Therapy dog.
Therapy dog. Yeah, so that's a little bit of an issue always in UPIC. But we are just,
oops, sorry.
Yeah, we're just discouraging pets. We are discouraging pets. Yeah.
Unless they bring with them a certificate that it's really a service dog or a certified service dog.
Right. That's how we've been trying to encourage it before this, and that may still work. So Ox Orchard had a question about, are any other parts of these country using these practices? Yes, there are places in the Southeast and Middle Atlantic that have already been implementing this as a way to manage people. In California, the UPICs initially were not allowed to do UPIC. So we feel lucky that we're not at that point in our season, and I think maybe they'll be able to change that as people wrap their head around how to physical distance. But there are other parts of the country that have been using scheduled picking definitely for quite a while. It's just as a matter of course, but are implementing that now in this pandemic time. There was another question about playgrounds, and I would say that playgrounds would be extremely difficult to manage. We are not, that's the challenge. That's a big challenge for many of us. Many of our UPICs we really try to cater to our customers and try to make it a pleasant, family-friendly activity. But we have to, this year, we really have to focus on trying to keep people there to pick food, and not think of this so much as a entertainment opportunity, which is it's an about shift in how we've been treating UPIC for the past several decades. The Department of Public Health does not have to give your farm the okay before UPIC, no.
Laura, someone was asking about where to get hand sanitizer, and I'm wondering, in New Hampshire, we have Ocean State job lots. Do you have those? Were you in your state?
We do have a few, yeah.
Because if you get on their mailing list, they like update you weekly on what they've got in the store. And I'm thinking if a farmer called their local one and said, can you help me out here when you get it in? Can you hold some aside for me? I don't know if that would work, but I know they update what they're getting in, like they have tons of gloves, they tell you that. So
that's
just
great. Yeah.
I mean, I don't want to push any company over another, but they're doing a great job at letting people know what they've got.
That's great. Thank you. Yeah, and there probably are lots of different companies, and again, starting early to try to source this stuff is going to be really important to your success, especially for the strawberry growers, because I think, you know, we really don't have a lot of time here. Does anybody have any other comments or concerns? This is a huge shift in things.
I have a question.
Yes.
Is anybody doing anything where they pay ahead of time online for a specific product and then showing a receipt or something so it can all be done ahead of time?
Yes, online purchasing is definitely, I've never heard of it being done so that they pay for the experience of going to pick X amount of produce. But I know that we have lots of farmers around here that are doing online ordering, and that there is a really great resource on the Cornell Small Farms website that talks about that. It was in the PowerPoint. But that is a great place to try to find. They kind of rate different things that are different platforms that you could use. And I just don't know if any of them have been used for, that have been actually used for UPIC. So that's the URL that can take you to the online platform ordering. That's definitely an option. Lawrence Farms wondering about checking bags coming in and out of the farm. So Lawrence Farms are talking about personal bags, and that is, I know many UPICs inspect personal bags, they inspect cars, they inspect everything depending upon what's allowed into the fields. And I would say don't allow personal bags. I think that is a contamination point. We want to have people just there they're not, they don't have to have their picnic with them. They don't have to, this is an opportunity, hopefully, to really kind of drive home the fact that this is about getting food, and we're not necessarily encouraging a lot of other activities out there in the field. So hopefully that answers that question. There's some more chat here about the different platforms for ordering. There's some really great ones out there. And the Young Farmers Coalition, yes, they had a really good, thanks Flip for sharing that, because I wouldn't have been able to find it. That is a great resource for comparing these different online ordering platforms. Anybody else got anything that they'd like to share? Please do remember that if you put your email in there, we'll make sure to get you the recording of this presentation along with a link to the document again. I think if you're from out of New York State, there may be slightly different, there probably would be different official guidelines from your state government, so make sure that you're looking at them. And then this guide is just really a resource to help you do the best job that you can. How many people do you think should be allowed in the pick your own fields per hour? That is a really great question, Katie. And again, it's going to depend on the size of your field, how far apart your rows are, what you can manage from a management position. So I really can't answer that, but if you kind of figure out how long your row is, 6 feet in between each person, maybe more than 6 feet if you get groups of people. So all of a sudden it's really challenging to put hundreds of people in a field. And then it's going to depend on how much they're actually picking. And my hope is that all of this protocol will discourage those people that just come in and pick half a quart of berries in an hour and a half. And maybe we'll get people that are actually there to, so Massachusetts actually has a guideline. Wow, that's nice. 114 people per acre. Interesting. Great. So may allow, okay. Thanks, Worries. 80 proof alcohol in a spray bottle. Yes, I think that actually it's 70 proof. Is 70 isopropyl and 80 regular alcohol? Is that, I wish, 80 proof. It's 70 and 80 are the proofs, and there's an isopropyl and then there's a regular alcohol. But those are listed again in the specifics on the document. And those are supposed to be used for sanitizing, or a Clorox solution, which is recommended by the CDC. And that is for COVID. It does not necessarily mean it's going to sanitize every organism. But remember too, that sanitizing only works on a clean surface. So you have to clean the surface and then you sanitize. And that's the challenge. So folks, we're just about at the end. I know everybody is super busy. I would be happy. Oh, Sue, go ahead and unmute.
Hi, Laura, can you hear me?
Yes.
Oh, great. So I just want to give it a little idea for some people that, with the thing with eating while customers are
picking, what we do, and I also sell chocolate confections, so I have a lot of regulation from the health department here in Vermont. But what we find is really nice to keep people from eating while they're picking, because, you know, they're putting their hands on their mouth, they're touching the plants. I mean, it can get crazy. We give out samples, and I do it in such a way to where the family or the group that comes in, you know, they can extend out their arm. We've already measured it. I'll drop a berry. You know, we have all of our rows marked which varieties of blueberries we have. They each get to taste the varieties, and then we'll tell them, okay, which ones do you like? Well, we like blue crop. So we're going to let them assign them to a row of blue crop, because, you know, I don't know about other farms, but we have this, normally when things aren't like this, we have what's called a pick and eat option, because we have a lot of people that want to eat while they're picking. So we have a cover charge of $3.50, and then the parents love it because then the kids can eat. Nobody tells them to stop eating, and they come in and they have a good time. And that's going to be a big disappointment this year, because we just feel that if someone is asymptomatic and they, you know, the kid spits and touches their mouth while they're eating berries, and then they start touching the plants, that, you know, anything can happen, and we don't want to take that risk. So we decided, in lieu of pick and eat this year, we will give each person a little sample of a berry. They tell us which varieties they like, and then we can assign them to that row. And then that's where that group or that family will stay, and they'll, you know, they'll clean a bush off. You know, it's going to end up being, please get as much as you can off of each bush that, you know, the row that you're assigned to. And it's more like grocery shopping. You know, it's an outdoor grocery market this year. It's a little bit more serious, but I think it could still be fun if because I know our customers are going to be heartbroken that they can't eat while they're picking. But some, you know, we might know that it might be okay, but some customers are going to go in there and go, wait a minute, that's unsanitary. They're eating while they're picking, and that kid just wiped. You know, any person that sees that kind of stuff might flip out. So to make everybody happy, we have to just let that one go this year. But I think giving out samples might help people realize, you know what, we'll give you a sample now up front, but when you're in the field, please refrain from eating, because it's just not sanitary right now.
So thank you very much. So we didn't address the sampling directly, but it looks like New York is not alone in that New York, Connecticut, Massachusetts are not allowing sampling at farmers markets. So I think I think if you did that, you'd have to proceed very, very carefully, but I appreciate the idea. Yeah. Sandra is asking, when can people go back into the area where people have been? And you already pegged it. You said the science says that the virus is not transmitted outside. So our thought is that as long as people are physically distant from one another and there are no sick people in the patch, that they should be able to go right back relatively quickly. However, because that does, like Sue was saying, there is this thing that we're going to have to deal with about the optics to our other customers. I would encourage you to try not to have people follow right immediately behind, so they just saw the group leave and then they're put in that spot. I would try to space them out so that they don't necessarily see that. And ideally, you could even do that, you know, the morning picks here and the afternoon consumers pick there, or you do an every other day or something like that. But we looked everywhere for science that proved or disproved that sun would kill this virus, and we just could not find any documentation about that yet. So our assumption is that it is not readily transmitted outside, but we don't have proof of that.
I would add to that ideally you'd be asking customers to pick all of the right fruit on the plants that they're picking in the section that they're assigned, in which case you don't want to send more people back down there the same day anyhow, because that fruit won't be ripe. So if you have the space, I think generally everyone is happier when they're picking, you know, an abundance of ripe fruit. So to have a new section for most people, and, you know, at least to come back the next day to give the fruit a little chance to ripen up.
Thanks, Esther. So yeah, Sandra's wondering if they don't pick it all, and that is a challenge, but just trying to, like Esther said, trying to space it through as much as possible. And that's part of that communication and messaging to customers. Maurice is wondering about Oxiday. Oxiday is not, yeah, it's not on the list of sanitizers right now. So you're thinking about running it over the field in between picking opportunities. I'm assuming that's what you're saying. Yeah. I don't think that there's any, I don't think there's any reason that we should have to do that, because we don't have any proof if that works. We don't have any proof if the virus can live. You know, it just seems like an extra step. And I know it's hydrogen peroxide, but I just don't know if there's any reason to believe that that would help with this particular situation, or as a food safety practice in a UPIC field at all. I don't think. I'm sorry about that. Elizabeth, do you have any thoughts on that? I just have never heard of that being done as a food safety in a
Yeah, I guess my thought would be that I would agree with you and that it probably wouldn't be necessary.
Yeah.
It seems, at least in my mind, fairly unlikely that the virus would be transmitted to a leaf and then the next person would have to touch that same leaf and then touch their mouth, and, you know, within a short period of time.
So Ox Orchard, just make sure to give me your email, and then I'll make sure to get you this information along with the document. And you can just text it to me directly if you don't want to share it broadly, but just put it in that chat box just to me. Great, thank you so much. So folks, I am really happy that you were able to join. I know that there's probably going to be plenty of other questions as we go forward in this season. This is a brand new, you know, situation, and it's just going to be a lot to handle. But I really appreciate you joining, and I think we're going to have a really great season. I think people are going to be so appreciative of locally grown food. I'm very hopeful that they put it all in perspective and that everybody has a really happy, safe, and very productive season. So I think we'll sign off now, and I'll make sure to get the information to you by tomorrow. Thanks a lot. Thanks, Esther and Elizabeth and Mike, for helping me.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.